the Russian economy may well be cooked. Just how did Vladimir Putin manage to put his country in a situation where inflation is out of control, but so is unemployment? Plus, we're going to talk about the U.S. Army's latest anti-drone doctrine. Is this written by someone who appears to have never seen a drone before? And is the U.S. Army in a lot of trouble unless they get their doctrinal act together? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. Okay, so this is part of a series of just absolutely grim economic data coming out of Russia. First off, the Russian military's personnel cost, which is the largest cost of the Russian armed forces, is, well, out of control, basically. In fact, it hit a record level in the first half of 2025, according to estimates from an analytic platform run by exiled Russian academics, exceeding $25 billion. This surge in spending, of course, is enlistment bonuses, salaries, and compensation for wounded soldiers and families. Basically, the huge paydays that Russia increasingly needs to offer to draw in a fresh round of meat for the meat grinder. And the problem with a high casualty war that depends on taking maximum casualties, particularly in your infantry and assault units, is that the Russian armed forces need to pay more and more to attract more and more people to this role, because it's really a vicious spiral for the Russians. Because one, you've already recruited and killed off anybody who's going to join for patriotism and anybody that's going to join for just an average salary. At this point, the only people who are willing to join are people that would need tremendous amounts of money for it to feel worthwhile to sign on to the Russian war machine. But it's compounded by two problems. The first is that units that have low casualty rates do not need additional troops. So drone units, for example, that take low rates of casualties, they really don't have a need for personnel. And so what you end up with is these new recruits are increasingly less likely to go to behind the line drone units or logistics units. Actually, logistics units also take massive casualties, but they are more and more likely to be funneled directly into high casualty assault infantry and logistics units. The result is, and the other result is that the word is out that more and more Russians understand what is happening, even though the Russian propaganda machine tells them that casualties in this war are low. The reality is increasingly hard to ignore. If you're in one of the poor rural Russian villages where recruitment is heavy among males, well, you're going to have seen at this point the number of people who were recruited, promised big paydays, and then killed off, and you're going to see their families bury them. And at this point, anyone who signs up knows full well what they are signing up to have happen. And so to beat those two things, you have to increasingly offer insane bonuses. Again, as one analyst pointed out, that the payments between enlistment bonuses, monthly salary, and death bonuses offset what a rural Russian might earn in decades. Literally, these are Russians who are receiving such huge bonuses that they are offsetting literally a whole lifetime potentially of not working. And that's, I think, who their actual target demographic increasingly is. These are Russians with chronic illnesses that prevented them from working, alcoholism, more alcoholism, and drug use. But again, you don't need to be complex to serve as an infantryman in the Russian military. You simply need to walk in the direction your superiors instruct you to walk in. But this figure is now, at this point, accounting for 10% of all Russian government spending in 2025 and 2% of Russia's entire GDP, right? Now, this is not the entirety of the war effort, guys. This is just the personnel costs of Russia's war effort. So a sub-spending category of Russia's war effort is soaking up 2% of gross domestic product. For proportion's sake, guys, that represents a spending level. Russia is spending more to recruit its meat for the meat grinder than the average European economy was spending on all of its defense prior to the start of the war. And these figures, it says, are likely going to increase literally by nearly 50% year on year. And this is, again, a sign that the Russian government is increasingly desperate. And the Russian government's public statements say that recruitment is great, that recruitment isn't a problem. But if recruitment was great at current bonus levels, why would the Russian government need to amplify them? Right? Think about if you were in the United States in the height of the Iraq War, you might recall that the Army rose its enlistment bonus for certain high-risk MOSs, infantry and logistics, up to $40,000. But that was sort of the limit. Once it hit that, they were able to recruit sufficient numbers of people. It was also helped by, oddly enough, another economic crisis. The 2008 financial crisis really helped a lot of the Army's issues. I remember going through basic combat training in, I think it was actually early 06, 07, when the first kind of wave of people were getting hit with defaults and losing their jobs or having their homes put at risk. And I remember there was a weird cohort, I'd say about a quarter of our basic training class were suburban dads who were like, listen, I lost my job. My family's going to lose their house. And I walked into an Army recruitment office and I said, I will sign on to the job that has the highest bonus rate. So this is, again, a sign that the bonuses continue to have to rise, that Russia is failing to meet its recruitment goals. But that's not the only sign that the Russian war economy is cooked. You see, trade between Russia and China, which, remember, guys, thanks to sanctions, China is the economic lifeline for Russia, particularly for consumer goods, food, cars, washing machines, dishwashers, iPhones, or whatever, Huawei's. This is the reason the Russian public can remain somewhat insulated from the effects of the war, because as long as China, the world's second largest economy, is willing to provide Russia access to its commercial goods, then the average Russian isn't going to feel as much of the pain of this war. The problem is that trade between Russia and China is actually falling, according to data released from China's General Administration of Customs. Chinese exports to Russia dropped by about 8.4%, but imports into China from Russia declined 9.6%. And this is insane because the currency difference between the two countries is actually being overwhelmingly in favor of Russian exports. Why? Well, look, you can see here over the last 12 months that the yuan has been basically stable relative to the dollar. There's been some fluctuations between 0.14 and, well, actually more of 0.14. So you can see that this is a really stable currency all told, right? So it hasn't had a currency shift. But over the past 12 months, you can see that the Russian ruble relative to the dollar, right, has actually experienced a tremendous rise. Or in this case, it's a rise in value relative to the dollar, which means that the ruble is looking weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And the problem with this steadily weakening ruble is that that's supposed to make it export friendly. Just think about it, right? Imagine you lived in a world in which the ruble wasn't worth very much, but you paid your workers in rubles. So when you farmed a potato in Russia, it cost you 3 rubles, right, per potato to harvest it, to plant it, grow it, harvest it, and process it. Well, those 3 rubles, if you sell that 3 ruble potato to China, because the exchange rate is favorable, China goes, man, just 3 rubles, that's so cheap. So now I want more potatoes because I can get more potatoes for every one of my yuan. But that is not the case here, right? So despite the fact that the Chinese can buy more rubles, right? Here's the ruble yuan exchange rate. You can see again, just the ruble absolutely losing value steadily. You can see that the exchange rate is becoming more favorable, but the total trade volume is still decreasing. And this is a sign that the Russian economy cannot actually produce the goods and services. Because even if it costs you just 3 rubles to make a potato, even if it costs you 6 rubles to make a potato, but 1 yuan is worth 12 rubles now instead of 6, well, you should want that, right? That should be a great deal. The Chinese should be saying, give me all your potatoes. I'll take them all. For the same 100 yuan I was paying for a bushel of potatoes. The point is that what that means is that that Russian potato farmer, and obviously I'm talking about agricultural goods, but imply this to a dishwasher factory, apply this to fertilizer production, apply this to Russian mining. It's all of it. What that means is that even if you say, I could grow this potato profitably, there is physically no one in Russia to harvest it. I cannot find a person to harvest these potatoes. Or worse still, the cost of these inputs is simply it's not effective. I can't do it. Maybe they say, listen, I can't afford the fertilizer. It physically doesn't exist in Russia. And so that is a tremendous problem. Normally, a normal economy not being crowded out by this kind of wartime insanity, what will happen is that as the economy falls and demand falls, it would say, okay, inflation's going to fall with it. Because what happens when it's harder? What happens when you have all of these potatoes and you try to sell them? And you say, man, nobody's buying them. You lower the price. The potatoes come down in price. Inflation goes downward. And the fact that the Russian economy is slowing, but inflation is continuing to spiral out of control is an absolute crisis for Russia. And here's another example, right? We talk about the fact that here's Russian workers, a plant that does have Russian workers, but the plant doesn't have the money to pay them. The exact thing we just talked about, where a Russian literal nuclear power plant being built in Turkey by a Russian company, the Russian company doesn't have the money to pay its workers. As exactly what we just talked about, right? Instead of potatoes, it's nuclear power, but the principle is the same. It doesn't matter how much you're getting for this nuclear power plant. There is physically not the money, not the resources to pay these workers. And so, of course, their solution here was simply to hire the workers and then just not pay them, just stick it to them. But that is not that's not a real plan. You cannot simply run an economy like this, right? Again, once these stories enter the media landscape, then you're going to have Russian workers who aren't going to sign on, right? Why would you sign on to do work and not get paid? And so this is, I think, a really troubling sign of the times. And it's only going to get worse. You can see here that Russia seized and annexed a once U.S.-owned Russian canned food producer. But originally, Russia seized this company in order to feed its own people. But now it can't even profitably sell canned food to its own people. So it wants to try to sell them to the Chinese, the North Koreans, just about anybody who can buy it. This is insane, right? And this is just again, you also have stories like this where Russia's own economic minister is like, listen, in 5 years, we are going to have an 11 million person labor shortage. Again, this is usually a sign that it's time to pay your people more. But again, if you can't bring in the revenues to justify paying people, you end up with this backward situation where both labor is very expensive and also businesses don't have any revenues to afford it. It's a ghoulish backwards world that is being made worse. It's being made worse by two things. The fact that Russia is paying able-bodied men, right, who disproportionately are agricultural workers and construction workers. It's paying them more money than anyone can afford. And it's also it's also killing them, right? So what you have is somebody who's buying up it's like cornering the market. Right? Imagine if your goal was to spike the price of a cryptocurrency and you were a crypto scammer. What would you do? You would buy as much of that cryptocurrency as possible and you would destroy it. You would freeze it in a wallet somewhere where no one could recover it. And so what that would cause is an exponential increase in the price as the supply diminishes, and the fact that you're paying more and more to purchase it is going to cause the price to spike. And so it's going to create this appearance of a thriving cryptocurrency but it's not. You're just a scammer. And that's essentially the scam that Vladimir Putin accidentally is running on labor, where he is removing it from the pool, overpaying for it, making the price unnaturally high, and then burning it, literally preventing it from ever returning to circulation. So supply and demand will never come back in line because you're actively destroying the supply. It's supplying fertilizer for the Ukrainian battlefields. It's not a good look for someone who basically has finally taken what is in effect one of his best allies, President Trump, accidentally or intentionally, I don't know, but taking one of his best allies and finally burned all of his bridges. Now, before we talk about the fact that the U.S. Army is also, in its own way, clueless about fighting and winning in the modern battlefield, I wanted to mention, of course, guys, that it's a Tuesday, and you guys know that means uncensored combat videos drop in on combatvetnews.com for members. I actually just got sent a 5-minute video. I haven't even taken a look at it from one of my contacts on the front line who always sends me absolutely crazy footage. And that's what Combat Vet News is about. It functions like Patreon. You sign up, $5, $10, or $50 a month, and you get access to uncensored combat videos, a weekly Q&A, shout outs at the end of videos. You get access to all this stuff. And most of all, it's the best way to support this channel. Keep me independent, keep me able to speak truth to power, even when YouTube says that I've used a no word. As you guys have seen, I've definitely done that with my most recent Epstein video. But that's okay, because you know what? The truth hurts sometimes. Anyway, let's talk about the U.S. Army. Now, the U.S. Army has released some provisional battle drills. Now, this is from one of the U.S. Army's sort of doctrinal doctrine producing facilities. They always change the name. It's literally like every 3 years. But basically, it's the schoolhouse. Schoolhouse's job is to look and say, listen, how does the U.S. Army fight on the modern battlefield? What are our tactics for winning here? And how do we turn a tactic into a procedure that we can train troops on? How do we train troops to respond to the modern battlefield? And they've said, listen, we think we have a new way to deal with unmanned aircraft system while in tanks. It's called drill title, React to Unmanned Aircraft System While Mounted Platoon. And that means, of course, mounted, referring to being mounted in a tank as opposed to dismounted infantry on foot. But take a look at this. Take a look at this absolute hot take. By the way, guys, it was approved about 18 months ago, which tracks, which means it was probably written 18 months before that. So it was probably written with like an extremely limited knowledge about UAVs. But this is emblematic, by the way. This sort of glacially slow timeline to respond to battlefield conditions is probably the number one problem in the United States military. But just imagine, right, that this was written, again, 18 months ago and has spent 2 to 3 years in the approval process, and it's finally been approved. So you can see, talks about sort of how to do so safely, what conditions should it be done. Q. Okay. So it says, in your tank, the designated air guard, this is the guy whose job it is to watch the skies, identifies possible enemy unmanned aircraft system and gives the vocal or visual signal alerting the platoon to a possible air attack. Platoon, by the way, guys, 4 tanks. Okay. So what do? 1, the guy whose job it is to watch for drones says, drone alert. I see a drone. He says, contact enemy UAS. North, south, east, or west, and then gives a visual signal for air attack. The platoon leader is going to tell higher headquarters, and then right now we start to see the mistakes happen. First off, they say tanks deploy into a herringbone formation. Now, if you have watched any amount of combat footage from the Ukraine war, you know that there's a reason these tanks don't deploy in a herringbone formation. And that reason is mines. So often, right, that you have very limited paths that are cleared of anti-tank mines. And when you have those paths, you stick to them like glue because it is so dangerous to veer off of these paths. And because you will go from saying, man, maybe a drone will hit me, to a mine will definitely blow me up. And so, right away, you see that this does not reflect the battlefield's reality, that mines are almost constantly deployed on the battlefield, right? Though correctly, they say the platoon increases its dispersion as best it can. This is actually sensible. But then The platoon leader assesses what is appropriate to counter the drone. They say, is the drone attacking us? Is it hovering like some sort of reconnaissance device? Or is it simply crossing, transiting like a Shahed going to a strategic target? And then dismounted soldiers, it said, immediately remount their vehicle and seek the best available cover. This is a dumb idea. Do not remount the vehicle. As we have seen, when a vehicle is attacked by the drones, you want to disperse. You want to reduce the appeal of that target. And we have seen so many Russian vehicles laden with soldiers that absolutely get pieced up by these drones, because the drones see an entire infantry squad crammed into some shitty Russian T-72. And a Ukrainian drone pilot is just like, dude, why would you put all your snacks in one basket? This is too easy. And they blow up the tank, the ammo cooks off, and all the infantry are killed along with the tank, right? So dismounted soldiers, you should instead seek cover if possible, right? Now, of course, I love, this is also classic Army doctrine. You should do this thing, or also the exact opposite, right? Remount the vehicle or get to cover. You should scatter. You should scatter. FYI, guys, you should scatter. Okay. Choose a course of action. Do nothing, which is actually probably the closest to the actual battlefield status, which is if a drone's going to kill you, you can do fuck all about it. The next one is also a good idea. Seek cover and concealment. It adds, listen, vehicles can create non-linear target moving as fast as possible, 45-degree angle away from the path of flight toward the attacking aircraft. This is also true. And by getting to cover and concealment, it's going to be harder for that drone to both see the tank, acquire the tank, right, to target it specifically, and then actually fly through, if it's an FPV drone, to maneuver through dense foliage to hit the tank. It's actually not a bad idea, but this is where things then get full on, as the Wall Street Bets people say, fully regarded. Now, this says that, you know what you can do, tank, once you've gotten to cover? You can shoot the drone down. Yeah, that's right. You're going to shoot down a bomber drone. Truly one of the takes of all time. They say, listen, if you can see it, you should shoot at it with all machine guns or canister rounds from the main gun. Now, again, if you have seen the speed and maneuverability of an FPV, you understand that a tank shooting with the main gun is literally impossible. We've seen on this channel, we have seen some absolutely unbelievable battlefield events. Things that statistically you would never think were possible, that you would ever see, right? Person-on-person knife fight. A person throwing their walkie-talkie at a drone and blowing it up. But we have never seen a tank shoot down a drone out of the sky. It has not happened. So why on earth do they think that's going to happen here? I don't know. Machine gun shooting at tanks? Yeah, I've seen it. We've seen it. We've all seen soldiers with AKs, a drone approaches, and they shoot at it. The North Koreans actually famously revealed that this is actually a possible tactic. People really thought it wasn't all that possible. It was sort of seen as a desperation move. But the North Koreans, who spend a lot of time on marksmanship, actually managed to shoot out the drones with some sort of regularity. So they tell the tankers, try to shoot at that tank. Try to shoot at that drone. Good luck, guys. And they say, did you do good? Did you see it? Did you make a decision? Did you choose a course of action? Did you do that thing? Here's the irony. So in some ways, the way this is written, you can basically do anything you want. You just have to, you can literally, it is acceptable to do nothing. They just said, one option, continue your mission. Another option is to run and hide. Another option is to shoot at it. So good old Army doctrine. This is exactly the kind of shit that I would expect from the Army, which they take a version of just do whatever the fuck you want and mash it together and then say, here's a drill. We're going to call it a drill. Just see the thing and then make a decision about what you can do. And the other hilarious part, though, is that even though basically the doctrine says every answer is acceptable, I can promise you the way the Army is training it, they're going to take the course of action that has the most words and graphics, which is this: herringbone, find it, get to cover, shoot at it. And they're going to practice this, and they're going to tell you, they're going to yell at tank commanders who don't herringbone, get to cover, shoot at UAV. They're going to be like, no, that's the right answer. It's like, no, dude, it doesn't say that's the right answer. It says this is part of your menu of answers. So does it mean the U.S. Army is comically out of touch? Yeah, for sure. For sure. Mostly because you can see that it's not even clear that this acknowledges the possibility of an FPV drone. But I think it's also a little bit of being so generic that it's no longer helpful. And this is sort of the problem, as we've seen, is that on the battlefields of Ukraine, reality changes every 6 months, right? And 6 months ago, jamming was the most important thing. And only in a few tiny parts of the front were there these strange reports of fiber optic drones. Now, fiber optic drones are everywhere. And the countermeasures look very different. And so the fact is that the U.S. Army can write all the doctrine it wants, but the battlefield is going to dictate reality. And the battlefield is going to be constantly evolving. And it is up to those platoon commanders to figure it out. And this is sort of the core problem, is that every time you come up with this doctrine, it creates a sense of complacency that this is actually the answer. Guys, this was the answer 18 months ago. It was never the answer. The answer 18 months ago, the answer today is you spot a UAV, you hope they don't see you, you make a deal with God. That's it. That's it. And if you have dismounted infantry who can get the fuck out of those tanks, they get out of those tanks. That's it. That's the react to the UAV. But the fact is that you cannot have this 3-year training cycle before people respond to conditions on the battlefield. The U.S. Army has to find a way to do it better. They have to do it faster. They have to iterate and codify battlefield realities so much faster than they are. 18 months is a whole war in the modern battlefield. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thank you to Peter Fucci, Dan M., Petchatoro, Henry Russer, Otis Guy, Call Chris Rossi, AL90, Sergei Zinchenko, D. Stewart, James Porsche, B. Hemmerling. All of our lieutenant tier members could not do it without you guys. Appreciate you so much, and I'll see you over there later today. Cheers. Thanks as always. Bye.